We live in an age where crossovers are commonplace. No better example than Marvel ruling the movieverse by having 3 superhero juggernaut films come out each year, and apparently audiences still can't get enough. I remember when Iron Man came out to universal acclaim, and we saw Tony pop up at the end of that mediocre Hulk movie, and everyone collectively soiled themselves at the possibilities. Fast forward 11 years, and now we got Thanos snapping his way into the unsettlingly popular Fortnite. Now that's when you know you really made it. But let me take you back to a time 17 years ago. Back to March 2002. Some rando developer named Square Enix, who happened to own the biggest JRPG franchise, selling over 144 million copies to date in Final Fantasy. For context, that's good for just outside the top 10 best-selling video game franchises of all time. Yeah, this developer approached another guppy in the market named Disney, and I imagine the conversation went something like this. Look, we got all these weeb fantasy characters. You just spent a decade making billions in revenue from animated films. What if, now hear me out, what if we mash them all together in a game about light, dark, and the power of friendship, and we let them partner with Donald and Goofy controlling a young boy that beats scary creatures mercilessly with a giant key? I'm sure Walt was all, let me stop you right there. You had me at Weeb Fantasy. And so Kingdom Hearts was born. This game was the holy grail of licensed property when I was a child. I remember seeing it at a friend's place and thinking, what bootleg people put this together? Whoa, this looks awesome, move, I wanna play. And the rest is history, or so you'd think. As we all know now, this franchise teased a 3rd installment after releasing 2 in a span of 3 years, but it took 14 years for it finally to see the light. With all the spin-offs and all the hype surrounding Kingdom Hearts 3's release, this man's heart is being melted back to that boy who hopes so readily for closure to the franchise. So today, let me welcome you to my ranking of the Kingdom Hearts bosses from worst to best. As a quick note, this franchise has so many bosses that I have to define them with my own criteria for what is and isn't a boss battle to make this ranking reasonable. It's all subjective, really. It's, do I consider it significant enough to be a boss? Exhibit A, no. Just no. Exhibit, holy shit, woo! Dodge, get him! Now that's a boss. If you see someone missing from these lists, then assume I didn't consider it significant enough to rank. With all that in mind, let's kick off the first half of my ranking of the Kingdom Hearts Final Mix bosses from worst to best. Coming in at number 30, Rock Titan. Bringing up the rock bottom of our list is this oversized punching bag. You see this monster staring you down and prepare to slay a titan, until you realize this fight is glorified ankle biting. He's so bloated that he can barely move, so you just whack away at his ankles until he falls over like a turtle on its back. Climb on up and smack his face until he shakes you off, then repeat. He does have a couple of attacks that deal extreme damage, but the issue here is that he gives you about 15 seconds between each move. You could heal your entire party and still have enough time to knock him on his butt before he'd get another hit off. Even if you do get hit, keep in mind that physical attacks restore your MP or magic points, allowing you to have guaranteed heals. That's assuming you actually get hit too. His attacks have the wind-up speed of an 80-year-old man attempting to throw a fastball, a feat which might break that elderly coot's back, but breaking your back is the last thing you'll do against this disappointment. Number 29, Cave of Wonders. One is a truth and one is a lie. The Cave of Wonders sucks ass, and so do I. The only thing I'm wondering is who playtested this abomination. The camera is an absolute nightmare. When you aren't getting whiplash from that, you'll be shouting in frustration at the unlimited spawning enemies, making it ever more difficult to accomplish your main goal: climb Pussy Mountain. The only weak spot on the Cave of Wonders are the eyes, and since the cave isn't nice enough to bow down and let you smack them, you have to waltz up the side of its head and stay up there to do damage. But it shakes you off so easily that you spend far more of the fight trying to get on top of it than actually fighting it. That makes this an endurance fight. Normally, I hate having a ton of normal enemies in a boss battle, but it does work here to keep your health replenished. The downside is that it means there's no real risk since you can keep getting healed. Instead, the only challenge is making that climb. It's such a mechanic poor slog, which is a real shame since the cave looks so cool. Number 28, Trickmaster. There's only one trick and it doesn't require a master to figure it out. This lanky carnival act has a single hitbox that happens to be out of your reach. You've got 2 methods to reach it: bait him to swing down and jump attack, or use a table in the arena to get on his level. It's actually pretty easy to bait and swing, but when he lights torches on fire in the second phase and starts doing dangerous attacks like shooting fireballs, that keeps you away from hitting him. Personally, I rank this fight so low because I found it tedious to get in contact with his weak point. I also think a lot of the satisfaction in this game comes from quickly getting in combos, and Trickmaster makes that a difficult strategy. Finally, I found the fight to be a little too difficult for its early stage in the game. Perhaps it's because I was only level 5, but Goofy and Donald died almost immediately, and then I was left with my pants down having to jump up solo to reach this lumbering Heartless. Maybe some of you didn't have much of an issue with Trickmaster, but I can only say that he is not my cup of tea. Number 27, Pot Centipede. Good god, this thing has a ton of HP. That or I was too low level again. I was level 17 when I fought this thing, and you just wail on it for an eternity. I'm not even sure what its attacks are. It just has a bunch of spider pots, its ass has tentacles that are on fire, and it keeps meowing like I'm some sort of dank catnip. I seriously think this fight took me 10 minutes that would have been better spent watching paint dry with my balls caught in a mousetrap. Okay, it's not nearly that bad, but I want to drive home how dull it is. That's because it's so easy to spam attacks without much repercussion, giving you infinite healing as a result. It does wander around and form together with other spider pots, but it didn't seem to make a difference either way. Just go crazy smacking it. The only time I even came close to dying is when I would impatiently test the limits of how long I could stand in the centipede's face and beat it mercilessly before I had to back off and heal. It's just not a fun fight, and it doesn't feel terribly well designed. At least it's nicely thematic to the world. Number 26, Oogie Boogie. Oogie Boogie is a delightfully wacky character, so it makes sense that his boss battle would align with his personality. It's a weird casino-style roulette wheel arena. It's a pretty unique setup. He'll summon fireballs to throw at you, or spawn spinning blades to come after you. Now here's where the problems start. First, none of that is hard to dodge, except when you take into account Goofy and Donald. When the blades spin, they just stand there and take the punishment so they die really quickly. That's a really bad oversight by the developers. To damage Oogie, you've got to press the button that corresponds with his location above. He'll be trapped and you get a few seconds to unleash your best attacks. Rinse and repeat until he's beat. It's a cute idea and all, but it's more dodging environmental hazards than anything else. There isn't a whole lot of fighting unless you're talking about fighting the camera. It's just dodge and beat on a sack of bugs. Then we go from mundane to DEFCON absurdity. Oogie becomes the fucking mansion. How does that even work? Seriously, how did this happen? The Heartless must have done it. They committed the ultimate taboo. Bug sack mansion transmutation. Or something like that. If you thought you were fighting the camera before, welcome to platforming the boss. It's horrendous. You jump around his body while he fires this sad, pathetic magic at you. You become Sora the Dermatologist, popping his purple pimples. Gross. This fight, if you can even call it that, is based far more on dodging and puts no emphasis on the offensive part of combat, making it a chore to complete. Number 25, Guard Armor. The second boss in the game has quite an interesting concept. Instead of being a singular entity, the boss is broken up into 5 pieces, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a body. The fight is by far the hardest at the beginning when it has all the parts at its disposal. It spends a lot of time spinning its arms around, which is easy to dodge, but it stops you from attacking, and it uses it so often you get stuck waiting for it to end a little too frequently. Other times the limbs break off and have a mind of their own. Honestly, it's kind of a mess to sort out for you so early in the game. You also don't have dodge rolling until after this fight, which means you suffer from having to hop around like a frog to be defensive. Once you break the first piece though, you get loads of health, and from there it's a domino effect. At this point I didn't really feel like I had gotten down the jump dodging, so I kinda wailed on it until it almost died, and then I used a potion not to die myself. The health pinata kept me alive from then on. It's a neat idea, basic fight, which is appropriate for a starter boss, but it's also not so easy that it feels like a complete pushover. I would say this is in the territory in which we're starting to get to fights that aren't exactly bad or boring, they just have a decent number of flaws. Expect us to stay in that range for some time. With that in mind, this is still a serviceable early game boss. Number 24, Sabor. The superior of the Kingdom Hearts felines, Sabor is a bit of a less traditional boss. Instead of having a specific arena, Sabor fights you throughout the deep jungle until you have a final confrontation toward the end of your time there. It's a neat concept that fits the predatory nature of the jungle. Sabor is lightning fast, but this is balanced well by his lower end damage. Sabor's attacks are surprisingly easy to parry for how fast they are, which for the record, parrying in Kingdom Hearts means timing your Keyblade swing at the same time as an enemy attack. The first fight has you solo, so it is a bit of a challenge. The final fight though is hilariously easy because you can pin him against the wall and gangbang him with Donald and Goofy. This is at least somewhat alleviated by Sabor's ability to hide in the bamboo, so at least they were thinking of some kind of counter to that. This fight finds itself lower on the list more for being overly simple, easy, and a bit repetitive more than actually being particularly terrible. Number 23, Jafar. I love the intro cutscene.
Wait a second, are you Maleficent?
Jafar proceeds to spill the beans about the princesses being able to unlock a door. Tell me all your secrets, you bozo! Probably why Maleficent doped the fuck out of this incompetence. Incompetence. That sums up this fight perfectly. Genie is turned against you, but that's okay because he couldn't smack a titty in the midst of an orgy and Jafar just floats around casting spells. Thing is, he's very easy to track and get behind, which keeps you safely out of range of said magic. Every now and again he'll turn around and hit you with some melee, and it's pretty painful, but it also doesn't matter because you get so many free chances to beat on him for MP to heal right away. It's surprisingly fun to get to wail on him so much, but it's brought down hard by the second phase. I never imagined myself beating a bird version of Gilbert Gottfried as a boss battle, but here we are. This is one girthy parrot too. It takes an eternity, at least 5 minutes of bird smacking, and Jafar probably only hit me once a minute at most. There's no real mechanics to speak of. It's dealing with platforms that bounce around while chasing Iago and laughing as Jafar does pretty much nothing. The only other thing that happens is Iago gets tired of carrying the lamp and lays there for a beating from you. Overall, the first phase is actually really fun. You get to beat on Jafar and he does a great amount of damage to keep it balanced, but his second phase might even be worse than the Rock Titan. Number 22, Captain Hook. My man Hook is a true pirate, and by that I mean he sounds drunk as hell at times. Look at him saunter in uninvited into Maleficent's chambers.
Just remember, this is no pleasure cruise. It won't be a pleasant voyage.
Did you hear that slurred speech? I would introduce you to the 12 steps, but I don't know if I can blame him. On one hand, he's got this brat to deal with.
I'm Peter Pan.
I'm Sora.
Okay, we're in this together, but only till we find Wendy.
Then there's a crocodile who has comically made it his life's mission to...
Oh, Speed, he's off on the other hand.
Poor guy. Oh well, you choose the wrong side and it's time to walk the plank. About walking, you won't have to do any of that in this fight. In Neverland, you get the huge advantage of flight. Hook tries to match this by jumping around like a superhuman acrobat, but it doesn't do all that much good, because when he isn't, he's as much of a punching bag as a Rock Titan. At least he dodges and hits more often, but having Cure upgraded right before this is the perfect timing for you to just tank through everything. For his personality in the situation, I love Hook, but the actual fight with him is mechanically a disappointment. And even though it's a little bit unrelated, I have to share this scene at the end where Peter is chasing that Wendy tail and Tinkerbell gets so jealous he says,
Do me a favor? Look after her for me, will ya?
Damn, you just gonna ditch your fairy like that? What do you think about that, Sora?
What?
Jeez, he doesn't want her either. Poor thing. Number 21, Clayton and Stealth Sneak. First, let's just get it out there that Clayton is ludicrously evil. Who hates monkeys enough to take unadulterated joy in killing them? That makes it all the more satisfying to knock that monster jaw around. Then suddenly, okay, that is terrifying. The first time I did this battle, I died to being careless, thinking this fight was gonna be easy. And it is, I just didn't realize you'd have to put some effort into dodging instead of just tanking hits outright. It's weird too, you've got two bosses working together with ranged attacks and it never felt like a problem to dodge. I guess that's because it's actually not a gank. You're the one ganking the bosses. Thanks, Donald and Goofy. It's a creative gimmick having the Stealth Sneak be invisible, but he quickly becomes visible and stays that way for the rest of the fight. Not all that exciting. Interesting thought to be sure, but not any kind of world beater compared to what comes after him on this list. Number 20, Anti-Sora. Oh, Riku, this could be our first opportunity to talk about you, but let's leave Edgy Boy for later. The point is, he's got dark powers and casually pops out a heartless version of you. This Anti-Sora harasses you throughout the level and seems to be kind of a pushover, but the true fight is a different story. At first it doesn't seem too bad. It can drop into the shadows like the basic Heartless, which can throw you off, but around halfway through the fight he starts spawning clones and getting much more aggressive. I think the second half of the battle lasted 3 times as long as the first because he moved so quickly and was invisible or in the shadows most of the time. This made it harder to maintain MP, and I got pretty close to dying as a result. It's a tough battle, and I like that it subverts what some of the previous bosses boiled down to, which is smack at a bunch to gain MP for Aroga and Kurega and tank everything. I love facing doppelganger versions of yourself in the right context, but with Riku just casually popping one out, it feels kinda like, okay? In the end, I'd say this fight is about average, mainly because it's more difficult for being fast and being able to disappear frequently than actually having a challenging arsenal of attacks for you to deal with. Number 19, Chernabog. This boss looks like a satanic Heartless, his size is imposing, and this dude has a massive health bar. You, however, have the ability to fly like in Neverland, which means you can dart around and dodge most of his attacks with ease. Personally, I just hung out behind his ears and smacked that back of the head booty. In that position, the only attack of real consequence is the fire AoE, but that's easy to dodge anyway, and even if you don't want to, it can be tanked and then healed. That is risky, of course, but since you spent so much time whacking him, it's easy to keep your MP up for healing. This fight reminds me a lot of the Ursula fight, but I found it to be surprisingly easy in comparison, both because I found Ursula very challenging and because I remember this boss being really hard when I was a kid. That left me surprised with how easy and uneventful this fight felt this time around. I think this is truly the average bar. Everything beyond this point is above average, at least to a small degree, but Chernabog is solidly average. Number 18, Parasite Cage. Starting off with this slightly above average battle, we have this fight that starts as a weak obliteration and ends with a pretty good encounter. The first time it's the 3 of you, plus Riku, plus Pinocchio's annoying shouts. Doesn't matter, boss don't stand a chance. It's another fight where you can kind of tank everything it throws at you by casting arrow and using cure as you keep getting your MP back from hits, but it's not that hard to dodge either. It's really underwhelming, with the only bit of excitement being that Riku is on your side for once. Lucky boy after you threw away that fruit he gave you at the beginning of the game.
I'm not gonna gonna let you poison me. I threw it on the ground.
You emotionless monster. Then again, Riku.
I have some unfinished business with this puppet.
For the love of God, man, don't take out your angst on the puppet. Getting back on topic, for the second phase, the arena changed to make the fight much more challenging. First off, no more Riku. Second, the arena is smaller with multiple platforms, and there's acid covering a large portion of the floor. The boss now has moves to knock you into that acid, and they hit really hard. It has acid breath with a generous tell, but huge damage over time if you get hit, and finally, it has double the health that it did earlier. To balance this out, you can stun it and hit a weak point on the inside that'll spew out healing orbs. My strategy was essentially the same here with melee spam, arrow, and cure, but this thing actually hit hard enough to make me second guess my level of health at a given time, and I was much more careful to dodge, a feat that isn't easy in this space. It's a much improved version of the first, a punching bag that packs a punch, so to speak, landing it just above the average bout. Number 17, Opposite Armor. At first I was gonna loop him in with a guard armor, especially because the fight starts off exactly that way, but I have to say that I was pleasantly surprised. Not just by the mecha transformation, but the moveset was vastly improved to its early game counterpart. I think the biggest difference is the ability to roll makes this a bit more of a hit and roll instead of a tedious hit and run. In fairness, you can't roll against the guard armor because he's the one who awards it to you, but it just felt so much better dodging his big swing attacks, running into damage, than popping out by rolling. Many of the same things are true. It's harder when there are more limbs, but the limbs are health pinatas. You have the heal spell at this point too, so that helps turn the tide in your favor. In return, this boss has a more dangerous move pool. The one attack I'm not the biggest fan of though is the cannon shot. He fires a big butt bomb and they're really hard to avoid, at least for me. That's probably because I'm up in his grill spamming R1 like the greedy Gus I am though, but hey, at least I own it. Much better than the first time around, and I'm honestly impressed they used a mild reskin to make such a big improvement. And coming in at number 16, Cloud. The final boss on today's half of the list, and I'm sure a few of you are surprised to see him here. Cloud is definitely a tough fight for the early game. He does a lot of damage and he's much more aggressive than most of the bosses you face to this point. I found it difficult to realistically get in hits against him. His best attack I found to go in on was his slam, after which you could get 2 hits in. Anytime I went for 3, he was able to hit me before I could roll away, so no bueno. It's really cool that it's possible to counter by hitting him at the same time, which does stun him. He even shouts before he does his piercing rush, so it's a great tell for you to parry. You gotta be bold to do it though, because his hits do dramatic damage. He is a doable fight though as long as you're patient and brought a lot of potions. Even if you can't beat him, you move along anyway. I thought this was a bit of a shame because if you die, you would have to go all the way back through to fight him again, but hey, you could always just ask him if he wants to fight you again.
How about a rematch sometime? Fair and square, no dark powers involved.
I think I'll pass.
Still enjoyable the one and only time you go at it. Except not really. You face him later in the Hercules Cup, and I guess you technically face him again in the Hades Cup with Leon as his partner. When you face him in the Hercules Cup, he has a pretty low amount of HP boss-wise at this point in the game, but when you face him, it makes sense. He jumps around and blocks a lot, so it can be tough to get those hits in if you aren't patient. His only added move is the one where he powers up, flies around, and comes at you with a terrifying amount of swiggity-swooty. The hits happen so quickly, you might not have time to heal, so it's a moment that forces you to dodge, which is a pretty solid mechanic compared to the normal tank and hit. Cloud is much more of a hit and run fight, which I do enjoy to some degree. And I'll be clear that I think he's certainly a solid boss. But what I don't like is that I think he leaves a few too little windows of attack for you in comparison to how much he attacks and how difficult said attacks can be to dodge. It isn't a huge complaint though, and we're actually getting to the point where I think the bosses are pretty good, as is true for Cloud. But we'll have to wait until next time to see where the rest of the bosses land. If you want to stay up to date on all that and the latest content from my channel, be sure to subscribe. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below on what bosses are your least favorites, and if you enjoyed the video, I encourage you to leave a like. It means a lot to me to know you're enjoying the content. As for today, thank you all for watching, much love to you, and I'll see you in the next video.